Imagine being betrayed by your own brothers, sold into slavery, and taken to a land where everything, from the language to the religion, was foreign. That was the reality for Joseph, the son of Jacob, whose story unfolds in Genesis. Yet, against all odds, Joseph rose to become second in command over Egypt, one of the greatest civilizations in the ancient world. But does archaeology shed any light on this remarkable account? While we don't have an artifact inscribed with Joseph's name, the discoveries made in Egypt help us place his story in a historical context that feels remarkably authentic. In this video, we'll look at how the biblical account of Joseph aligns with archaeology and whether the evidence of history supports his incredible rise to power. Joseph's story begins in Genesis 37. Favored by his father Jacob, Joseph was given a richly ornamented robe, sparking jealousy among his brothers. They sold him to traders heading to Egypt. Archaeology shows this was not unusual. Egyptian tomb paintings from Beni Hassan, dating to around the 19th century BC, depict Semitic families from Canaan entering Egypt with donkeys, goods, and children. The parallels are striking. These records confirm that people like Joseph really were arriving in Egypt from the Levant, just as the Bible describes. Once in Egypt, Joseph was sold as a slave, wrongfully imprisoned, and finally brought before Pharaoh to interpret dreams. Genesis 41 records Pharaoh's vision of 7 fat cows consumed by 7 lean ones, and 7 plump heads of grain swallowed by 7 thin ones. Joseph explained that Egypt would see 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine, and he was placed in charge of storing grain. This fits perfectly with what archaeology shows us about Egyptian administration. Excavations across Egypt reveal massive storage facilities and silos from the Middle Kingdom onward. Reliefs and records show the vizier, Pharaoh's highest official, overseeing agriculture and grain reserves. In fact, Joseph's new title and the honors Pharaoh gave him, his signet ring, fine linen garments, and a gold chain, are exactly the symbols of authority we know viziers wore. Genesis 41:42 describes these gifts, and archaeology confirms their significance in Egyptian culture. The Bible tells us Joseph married Asenath, daughter of an Egyptian priest of On, or Heliopolis. Archaeology identifies Heliopolis as one of Egypt's great religious centers. Marriages between foreigners and priestly families helped integrate outsiders into elite society. The detail is small, but it is another example of the Bible aligning with Egyptian custom. But what about the famine? Genesis 41:56 says, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in all the land. Could this reflect real events? Archaeological evidence says yes. Ancient inscriptions, such as the famine stele on Sahel Island, describe a 7-year famine remembered in Egyptian tradition. While written much later, it shows that the idea of prolonged famine was deeply rooted in Egypt's memory. Add to this modern climate studies showing cycles of drought in the region, and the biblical story fits into a historical pattern. Egypt really was the place people turned to for survival when famine struck. In Genesis 42, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt to buy food, not realizing the official in charge was their brother. This too makes sense historically. Egypt's wealth and centralized food supply made it a magnet for neighboring peoples during times of drought. Archaeology shows evidence of Semitic populations in the Nile Delta, particularly at Avaris, where excavations reveal Levantine-style homes, pottery, and burials. This settlement lines up with the Bible's description of Jacob's family settling in the land of Goshen, part of the Delta region. Genesis 47:27 says, Israel settled in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it, and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. Archaeology shows Semitic groups multiplying there in just the way Scripture records. One of the most intriguing finds at Avaris was a large villa containing a statue of a man with foreign features: yellow skin, red hair, and a multicolored cloak. Though the head was smashed, scholars note the unusual depiction and foreign style. Some suggest it could represent a Semitic leader of high status. While we can't claim this is Joseph, it shows that foreigners could rise to prominence in Egypt, which mirrors Joseph's rise in Genesis. What's remarkable is how consistently the biblical details match Egyptian culture. Joseph's coat of many colors reflects the depiction of a foreign official in a multicolored garment. His promotion to vizier mirrors the known symbols of authority. His marriage into a priestly family reflects Egyptian custom. His management of grain and preparation for famine aligns with what archaeology confirms about Egyptian food storage. And the migration of Jacob's family into Goshen fits with evidence of Semitic settlement in the Delta. None of this proves Joseph directly, but it shows that the Bible's story is rooted in authentic Egyptian history. Some skeptics argue that because we lack direct inscriptions naming Joseph, the story must be fictional. But think about it. The records of common officials rarely survive. Egypt preserved the names of pharaohs and generals, not foreign viziers. The absence of Joseph's name is not surprising. What is surprising is how well the biblical account fits the cultural and archaeological evidence. Rather than being a myth set in a vague land, Joseph's story is woven into the fabric of Egyptian history. And the heart of the story is not just archaeology, it's what Joseph himself declared in Genesis 50:20, when he told his brothers, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Joseph's journey from betrayal to power shows us how God can use suffering for greater purposes. Archaeology may not give us Joseph's personal seal or tomb, but it provides the backdrop that makes his story all the more real. Egypt's tombs, temples, and records remind us that this was not a fairy tale land. It was a real place where God's providence unfolded. So, does archaeology prove Joseph existed? Not directly. But does it support the biblical world he lived in? Absolutely. From Semitic immigrants in Egypt to famine traditions and granaries, the evidence lines up with Genesis. Joseph's life continues to inspire, not only as a tale of faith and forgiveness, but as a story set against the very real backdrop of ancient Egypt. And in that, history and scripture come together to tell us that God's hand works in both the lives of nations and the lives of individuals.